You should put some thoughts into your lay statements and be clear about what you're trying to accomplish with them. And really, the main goal of a lay statement is to give the VA all the facts they need to decide your claim the way you want them to decide it. Because you can't win if the VA doesn't have all the evidence to decide in your favor. And to do this, you have to back up, start at your claim, take a look at it. What evidence do you need? What evidence is still missing? And then ask yourself, can I fill that evidence gap with a lay statement? And if the answer is yes, then start writing a lay statement. Now, the types of evidence gaps that you can fill with the lay statement usually falls into two categories. The first is you describing how your service caused the disability. And the second is you describing how bad your symptoms are. Now, you don't always need both in every lay statement. For example, if the VA has already service connected you for a disability, but they just rated you too low, when you file a supplemental claim and you're adding a lay statement, you don't need to focus on why your service caused the disability because the VA already agrees with you. Instead, focus on your symptoms. You really only need to talk about how bad it is and why they rated you too low. You really shouldn't be talking about medical diagnoses in your lay statement because the VA really doesn't want to hear it from you. Now, symptoms are fair game. Symptoms are always fair game. You can talk about the pain in your knee. VA doesn't want to hear you say you have arthritis. Now, potentially you could say your doctor told you you have arthritis. That's fine. But if that's true, you're much better off going to get the medical record from your doctor where it says you have arthritis and put that in your C file. Now, if you don't have that medical record, the VA is not going to really take your word for it. So in either case, whether you've got a record that proves your doctor told you that or not, you saying it in your lay statement has limited value. And a lot of times you're just wasting space and effort to say that. And once you've narrowed down what you need to talk about, start writing. And what I usually tell people is to write everything that's on their mind that they can think of, and then let it sit for a couple of days and come back to it in the future. What you'll find is that when you walk away from it, your subconscious brain will keep thinking about it and mulling it over. And as a day or so goes by, you'll remember more things that you want to add. And it's far more productive than just sitting there and staring at a piece of paper trying to remember everything. And you can just repeat that cycle until it stops being productive. But then at some point, you're going to have to switch from writing to editing. And when you do that, it's helpful to think about what you're trying to accomplish again and get that goal fresh in your mind again. So you know exactly what you're trying to do, and your editing brain can help you get there. The other thing that's helpful to remember, especially at this stage, is think about who's going to be reading this and think about what you can do to make it more likely that they will actually read it, understand it, and believe what you're saying. Remember that the rater doesn't know you. They've never heard your voice. They've never seen your face. They wouldn't recognize you if you pass them on the street. The only thing they know about you comes from your claims file, which is just your service records, your medical records, and any lay statements that you or anybody else has written about you that's made it into the file. So that's it. The other thing to remember about them is that they're extremely busy. They're not going to have the time to read a 35-page lay statement if you want to send them one. They're just not going to do it. So you've got to whittle it down, make it as short as possible, but still accomplish the things it needs to accomplish. And there's some tricks you can do to help do that. I recommend you organize your lay statement by disability and use headings. So there's a clear heading that this section talks about PTSD, this section talks about your knee, and so on and so forth down your claim. The point to creating a structure for your lay statement is to make it as easy as possible for the rater to find the specific information that they may be looking for. Now, we all hope that they would read the whole thing and understand it and believe it and agree with it and everything like that. But if they're not going to do that, I at least want them to know that if they're curious about what you've got to say about your knee, but they don't care about your PTSD, they'll at least go and read about your knee. And they'll know that they don't have to wade through 8 to 10 to however many pages to find that little bit that talks about your knee, they can go straight to it. So again, organization is your friend. The other thing you can do is go back through your lay statement and look for places where you repeat yourself. You don't want too much repetition. Now, there's, of course, that school of thought that says you have to say a thing multiple times so that it'll sink in and people will remember. And that's true. But at a certain point, your repetition has diminishing returns. And beyond that, it actually becomes counterproductive. And if you're editing your own paper, I'm worried that you might not know when you hit that point. So if you can have somebody else look at it, definitely do that. And that's great advice anyway. But if it's just you, err on the side of removing repetitions. Another thing you want to do when you edit is make sure that you use specific numbers as often as you can when you're describing your symptoms. A lot of veterans want to say things like, I get headaches all the time or often, or they'll use phrases like that. The VA doesn't know what to do with that. And worst case scenario, they're going to say often means once every 6 months. And that's going to hurt you, definitely hurt your rating. What you want to say instead is, I get headaches 5 times a week or 5 times a month. Whatever the number is, say the actual number. Sometimes it's hard to avoid those general statements. You might want to say, I get road rage every time I drive. And that's fine, but be sure you follow that up with the frequency of how often you drive. And it might sound like, I get road rage every time I drive. I do everything I can to avoid driving. However, there's at least 5 times a week I can't avoid it and I have to do it. Now, when you're editing, I think it's important that you don't make it sound too polished. It shouldn't sound like an English professor wrote it. And unless, of course, you're an English professor, then knock yourself out. But a lot of veterans they'll want to have their spouse or someone else write it who's better at writing. I tend to think that's not a great idea or not the best idea. Remember, this is the only chance the rater is going to have to hear you speak in your own voice, or as close as they're going to get to it, right? It's you speaking in your voice. So when you're writing, and definitely when you're editing, imagine you're sitting across the table from that person having a conversation with them. How would you say this in that context? And that's how you should write it, or it should be closer to that. It's never going to be the ideal because that's just not how the written language works, but that's what you should be leaning towards. Now, I have submitted some long lay statements. I am not opposed to them. I think if it's the longer it is, the more you should question, does it really need to be this long? But that's not the main factor. Again, the main factor is, does it say everything it needs to say? Will it fill that evidence gap that I have so the VA can decide to claim how I want to? That's the first and number one question. And if the answer is yes, then, of course, start making it shorter. Start making it more clear and more readable. But you never want to make it so short that you lose that main point, or you lose a critical piece of information that the VA definitely needs to know. It's normal to struggle with where that line is. And I typically say, if you're struggling, then you're probably okay. There's definitely more to say about lay statements, but I think I'll stop there for now. I hope you found this video helpful. Again, if you'd like me to help you with your claim, you can reach out to me through the links below. I'm Al Walsh. Thanks for watching.